Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Leonardo stage today. Up first, we have Kevin Doughty, and he will talk about how telehealth can connect with the digital world and revolutionize individual care and support services. Kevin, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for turning up here bright and early. Digital healthcare is ill-defined. So during the next 40 minutes or so, I will try and give you examples of how it works and where the future lies in terms of utilising it for benefiting mankind and society. So as some context, the world is still young, and that's demonstrated by the age of the participants here this morning. But it's getting older. Last year, there was only one country in the world, Japan, that had more than 30% of its population, if you like, of a retirement age. By 2050, it'll be 64 countries. And that includes the entire European continent. And there'll be 3.2 million centenarians. The majority of them actually in Europe. So we must prepare for that. And in terms of the way Europe's aging, this slide shows you 4 different views. There are 4 different bits of information here. One is simply looking at the population. The second is looking at the dependency ratio, which is how many older people are being supported by people still in work. And the third is the shape of this population, the profile, if you like, and how that's going to change over time, as well as the male-female ratio changing. So I'll just step through the population as a function of time, 2015, and look how things are moving from below to above. And as that shape changes, by the time we reach 2050, what we have are more people than ever before in the bottom half of that structure. The problem is that an aging population means more people with disease, chronic disease in particular. Chronic disease sometimes meaning lifestyle disease, even preventable disease. These are some of the big killers, ultimately, and they're going to escalate by high percentages. Even in the states where they think they spend more money than anybody else on this, they're going to see this enormous increase in the number of people suffering from these chronic diseases that cannot be cured, but can be managed. So, what's the cause of it? Well, the epidemic is due to a number of factors, and they're pretty obvious, I suppose. When you look at the way we live, what we eat, our diets, the environment itself, people using or abusing lifestyle drugs. Perhaps the air is not as fresh as it should be. Poverty brings inaccess to the services that can prevent these things. And then there's stress and people's lifestyle just not exercising enough. And it's going to affect people in 3 particular ways. There'll be circulatory problems. They will result in heart disease. They will result in stroke. Because of smoking, people will have respiratory diseases. And there'll be endocrinal problems also. And that will show up in diabetes more than ever. Now, diabetes is worthy of focus because it's one of those which affects people across the world. The 2 biggest factors are people getting too fat, if you like, not exercising enough, and the other is genetic. And what that actually means is if you look at the Middle East and to a certain extent the Indian subcontinent, they are genetically programmed to have diabetes, type 2 diabetes at some stage during their lives. And because of diabetes, people have problems with mobility, leads to amputations, and it's the biggest single source of blindness. So you can see big chunks of Africa, for example, where people are blind to a far higher level than they are in Europe, and it's because of diabetes very often, causing cataracts. So what's the actual cause of diabetes? Why is it increasing? Well, mankind has, I suppose, evolved. It's taken us 2.5 million years to get off our knees and to walk tall. Another 100,000 years and we really have developed into the keen intellects that we have. We've thrown away our spears and we've taken up computers, for example. And what that really means is we've spoilt all that evolutionary progress in 50 years by overeating. And I blame remote controls, I blame oversized meals, and what we mustn't do is allow perhaps emerging nations in Africa, let them think that as long as the Coke you're drinking is Diet Coke, then it doesn't matter how big the meals that you have. We must stop that happening at source. So we have a real problem, and Europe is ahead of the world in recognizing it. And the solution is greater efficiency, greater knowledge, greater transparency, letting people know what's going on and what they can do to improve the lives, not only of themselves, but of Europe as a whole and of the rest of the world too. So I think the solution is called digital healthcare, something which is extremely poorly defined, as I suggested. But what I'll do now is go through with you some of the elements of that. And it has to start with information and how it's recorded in a digital world. Information isn't much use if you can't communicate and if you can't access it. So telecommunications plays an enormous role in making sure that those records are accessible and can be populated by people at the points of care. As you might expect, processing is crucial to this, as is the interface that allows people to look at the information in an analysed form. Much of this is to do with software, and the rest of it's to do with hardware. So if you like, anything digital involves program writing, it involves building the interfaces, it involves building the final product that people will buy and use. And then there are the services. How well developed are they? How easy is it to buy into? Are they accessible to the whole world? Or are we going to spoil things by taking them away from the people who really need them? And finally, how much of this can we do ourselves? How much do we know about ourselves? How much should we know and use about ourselves? So that's the agenda. So let's start with information and information systems. And they start perhaps at the hospital, the points of care. 150 years ago, X-rays first appeared, and very quickly they were deployed across the medical fraternity, mainly to look at fractures. And within 100 years, we developed all other types of imaging as well. So we moved from basic X-rays to CAT scans, to MRI scans, to PET scans. And each of those produces so much more data that we are in danger of being overwhelmed. The data is only any use if we can add it to all those millions of records already available. This just indicates over a decade in England what happened in terms of all the extra testing that was done. And as you might expect, there's an exponential growth in the amount of data that people have to save and store and access. Moore's law was about processing. It was about doubling of the number of transistors every 2 to 4 years. Perhaps it also applies to data storage and their costs. What we know is that data was very expensive to store years ago. Some of you might remember tape players. But as we move towards cloud, we now have this decline to the point that as we reach 2013, the cost of a megabyte of data storage is less than a cent. Telecoms, well, I doubt if any of you really remember the old dial-up systems anymore. We're all about 3G and 4G and the very fastest access by mobile. And what we have is very fast increases in mobile speeds and in the download speeds available to people's homes. And for the UK, for example, there are now far more subscribers than there are people. So it means people have 2 or more devices. Across the world, what we see is that Europe, North America, they all have a high density of connection through traditional telephone lines. But look at Africa, look at Southeast Asia. It hasn't impacted them, And I suspect that they never will. So what we will see here, great opportunities to jump through that connected region where you had to have wires and you had to dig trenches and install fiber optic cables. And we'll move straight into a mobile era where people can carry their communication with them and where people will be able to do this wherever they are at any time. And of course, this shows you once more that it's not only about calling someone. When you need information from the internet, there are swathes of the world where they don't have anything yet. So this is where mobile will once more provide a new way of doing things. Personal computer interfaces. Well, I used to have one of these sitting on my desk. I was really proud of it. Twin floppy drive, 1.3 megabytes per disk. And sometimes when you had a really impressive new program, you used to have a pack of 8 disks for installation. At the same time, people were predicting change. And I quite like this. Now, who really imagines things happening in this way? And I can remember BT Telecom Systems in their Martlesham research facility demonstrating this as something really usable. Well, by the late 1990s, people had abandoned it and said, it will be different. And of course, they were right. But in terms of the computing, that's still the computer I have on my desk. I used to have a personal digital assistant. They've just about disappeared and been replaced by something considerably lighter, thinner, and more powerful. And in the future, of course, we see things with virtual keyboards. We see computing which is worn. We see that horrible worn headset replaced by Google Glass and something that really does look cool. Will it be on your arm? Will it be on your head? Will it be on your hand? Or will it actually be on any surface you want it to be? I think they're all possible. And yesterday, we saw the launch of perhaps the first proper smartwatch. It didn't look like that, and it wasn't based on a ring, and it looked far more like what people were thinking it would look like. And of course, Apple are likely to have their own. But there will be Samsung watches, there'll be LG watches, and lots of others, as soon as people understand that we need things that are accessible, always with us, so that we don't feel embarrassed or in any way conspicuous by the interface that we choose to use. But do we really need to press buttons? Or perhaps we can just speak to people. The interactive keyboard. I quite like the idea of just speaking and the computer knows what I want and do it. We know that speech recognition has improved tremendously. If you're prepared to wear a headset, as I'm wearing, with a microphone that doesn't really pick up the sounds over there, then we know that the success of speech interaction and interpretation is increasing all the time. And ultimately, perhaps we only need to think about it. Well, easy to plan, the thought, get rid of the mouse, think about it, move icons around with your mind. We know we could implant something within the brain, that works, but what might you have to wear? Yep, that's what gamers are wearing today. But in terms of practical application, she is wearing that type of interface. She is profoundly paralyzed. She cannot move her hands. She cannot move her legs. She is controlling a robotic arm to give herself a drink by thought alone. So real practical possibilities in the world of disability. But people who are disabled, they also want to get around. So can you amplify muscles? This gentleman is 93. He lives in a retirement facility in Tokyo. For all his working life, he was a gardener, and he loves tending to plants. But because he has arthritis, he can't bend down. Well, actually, he can bend down. He just can't get up again afterwards. So they produced an interface for him, which used his own attempt to get up to use amplifiers, an exoskeleton to lift himself up. Well, that's now, the same principles are in place with lots of exoskeleton that allow walking people. This is perhaps the most sophisticated. It's from New Zealand, and the claim is that anyone who can move themselves around in a wheelchair can actually get up out of that wheelchair and walk using Rex. 70,000 euros. But the price will fall. And what we are seeing is lots of much smaller devices with perhaps 3-4 hours battery life. People who can't get upstairs, they can put on one of these. And this is the Honda version, but there are other versions too. And if there are any of you from Germany, that trial is about to start with 100 patients who are going to use it for rehabilitation. So someone who might have needed an elevator previously to get upstairs can now do it themselves. And this is part of this interface, if you like, the man-machine interaction, which is becoming increasingly part of digital healthcare. Moving back to software, the hospital system, well, that happens to be a big new hospital in Birmingham. Quality is the key. How do you compare the performance of people in a hospital? Well, it starts off by reviewing the prescriptions, the information flow, and people's performance as well, and how they communicate. It's important if you're going to prevent antibiotics becoming redundant in the fight against bacteria. You must stop antibiotics after a certain time. So the hospital has said after 5 days, you stop antibiotics. In practice, if you look at the red curve, it didn't happen. It was almost flexible. As soon as you provide information that tells nurses and doctors 5 days are up, stop this antibiotic, then that's where the action occurs. You see improved performance, and ultimately the resistance to antibiotics will improve. How much they're omitted, how much prescribing gets taken wrongly. If you have information that's presented the whole time, it improves performance, it improves compliance, adherence. And in fact, with a dashboard of this type, management can look at the nurse performance, the ward performance, and even individual surgeon performance. They can be compared with other surgeons in the hospital, and they can be compared with surgeons doing similar operations in other hospitals in other countries. So perhaps for the first time, we really can look at outcomes in a way which identifies best practice and poor practice so that we all aim for the best. One of the big issues is how much of a risk will a doctor take? If you imagine yourselves in an operating theatre with a scalpel in your hand and you're trying to remove a tumour which is close to an artery, how close would you be prepared to cut? We all have tremor. Even if we don't really have the physical shakes, we'll be aware of the fact that there will be a margin. And most surgeons will tell you if the gap is less than 10 millimeters, they would not be prepared to cut. If you use a Da Vinci robot, for example, they will get within 2 millimeters. And that type of surgery can be performed remotely. So if you have an expert controlling the robot, he can be in a different continent. And perhaps the biggest benefit will be in specially designed equipment for routine surgery. So the design and the design interfaces are, and while you're here in London, try and get to see the demo situation in Imperial College. This is where the surgeons of tomorrow are already being trained. But robots are already in hospitals, and the biggest function is in the pharmacy. A typical pharmacy will have over 1,000 medications that need to be selected. The error rate within human beings is about 2%. Poor pharmacists who don't quite understand the generic differences might have 5% errors. Robots don't make these mistakes. Robots read labels, they read RFID tags or barcodes, and they pick and place and select carefully. Bottom line is, safety is improved, and there's a big financial benefit. Nearly €1 million a year for any hospital that adopts these technologies. I mentioned Scotland at the end of that slide. Scotland probably leads the world in terms of using information at primary level and secondary level. And if you take their diabetes system, for example, they know exactly how many people have diabetes. They track them. People can register. They have the data online, and all the systems talk to each other. And the result is that the outcome measured by the HbA1c measure, which is to do with blood glucose levels, it has been compliant for more patients than any other country. They also can evidence change when things happen, such as a smoking ban. Now, most of Europe, certainly Northern Europe, has already adopted smoking bans for public places. What's the impact? Big change in the number of people who have coronary syndrome. Big change also in the number of people presenting to hospital with acute asthma attacks, directly correlated with the effect of smoking in public places. And they can compare it with a situation in England where the ban occurred several years later, so they can be pretty sure that it was to do with the smoking ban. Information provides evidence, evidence improves quality. And then, underlying all of this, you have this ability to mine this data. And the big opportunity for you and for anyone else interested in digital healthcare and analytics generally is what's known as big analytics. In healthcare, patient records are pretty standard database systems. But actually, an awful lot of the data isn't in the usual structure of databases. It's because it's images, it's pictures. So how do you put all of this along with what people say and feel? How do you merge all this along with other interesting things about them and their family history, which has never been thought of before? And it's all about visualization. So what we have are these techniques being applied perhaps in the financial services industry, where we're looking at risk in very different ways. And you know, people's behavior determines all this. How much risk will people take? How much risk do you take in your lives? There are risky behaviors. It's not about what you do on Friday the 13th because it's supposed to be unlucky. It's more to do with your profile and the risks that you are prepared to take. If you play games, you know, what sort of games play are you? Do you take the high risks? Are you a gambler? Well, if you are, should you be employed by a bank? I think we need to look across all these disciplines to understand the analytics that are involved in making decisions. So ultimately, we will have lots of different treatment options for diseases. Some will suit people who take risks, some will take those who don't. So the analytic tools, the Hadoops of this world, they will be important, but so will the way that we capture this data. And we're already starting to do some of these things. Using just the basic information available in a system like England's, you can look at all the prescribing patterns. You can look at a lot of information that tells you straight away, if you live near Manchester, you're more likely to die of a heart attack. Well, that doesn't mean move away from Manchester. It means let's look at what it makes people in Manchester more prone to that. And you start digging deeper and you find out what those risks are. So it does come down to the treatment and the services that are available. Now, a lot of my background has been providing services for older people. My wife's a nurse. We ran a care home for the elderly, actually during the 1980s. And when our own family came along in the 1990s, I moved out to that area and moved very much into care in the community, seeing, do we really need to look after older people in what are effectively boot camps where you do everything for people and take away their independence? The answer is no. The answer is we should use tele-facilities, telehealth services, telecare services. Many of them are pretty simple. This is a standard approach which is available, I guess, across Europe. We've got about 1.8 million people in the UK who now have this. The box represents someone's house. There are a number of sensors within that house that are designed to manage the risks of the person living in there. So let's suppose that Mrs. Jones, who lives alone there, and she happens to be my aunt, so I know her rather well. She's 88. She lives alone. She falls. She's injured, but don't worry, she is wearing a fall detector. And the fall detector automatically raises a call through the telephone network to a monitoring centre who speak to her. And they say, Mrs. Jones, are you all right? And she says, help, I'm on the floor, I can't get up. So they say, don't worry, we'll organise someone to come and help pick you up. A very basic telecare system, which is fine for someone who lives in the house, is worried about falls, and who actually can't get out much. Now, the real problem with that approach is it's reactive. She has fallen. Wouldn't it be better if we could have predicted that fall and then prevented it? And of course, that's where we move. So that's the magic carpet, which was designed by Manchester University researchers. It's a fibre optic carpet that looks at gait patterns, it looks at the way she moves, and it tries to predict that she's going to have a fall in the next week or next month, and allows interventions to take place. And if she does fall, then it sees her occupying a rather large space on the carpet, and therefore it can do the same as an alarm would do. But a big part of it is actually managing your health. This is an old-fashioned telehealth system, and telehealth systems record vital signs that measures someone's blood pressure, and you'd put that on once or twice a day. But actually, that's very much like what would happen in a hospital 20 years ago or in a GP surgery. It doesn't really help you stay at home. So that's a bed, a smart bed. In fact, in this case, it's a smart blanket which measures your vital signs without you having to do anything in it. It measures the small vibrations that your chest makes because you're breathing. It measures the even smaller vibrations that's due to your heart moving. So it can measure your pulse rate, it can measure the arrhythmia. And there are similar systems from Europe, from Finland, from Holland, that can do it just based on the bed itself and how it moves. Or you might want smart pajamas or a smart vest with the sensors integrated, and they too are available. Or just a sticking plaster from a company called Tumaz here in the UK. And that collects your ECG, and it sends the data wirelessly, of course, to someone who can analyze it. That's the Proteus ingested pill. So instead of sticking something on the outside, it measures your vital signs from the inside. And Lloyd's Pharmacy are now using that in trials, initially for people who have a mental health illness to make sure that they comply, but ultimately it could be for any medication, because medication compliance is poor, and if you want the best outcomes, you make sure that people take their medication on time. And I quite like this idea. You look at the mirror in the morning, and what do you see? Well, yes, you see your face, but what if the mirror spoke to you and said, God, you look rough today, as mine did this morning. But I always look rough at 6 o'clock in the morning, but it's actually noticed that I've got a little mole above my eye. And it's also noticed that over the last 12 months, the size, shape, colour of this mole have changed. So it takes a picture and it sends it to a specialist, to a dermatologist for assessment. And that's reassuring to know that my mirror is looking after me. And while it's doing it, of course, it's looking at the way the blood flows in and out of my face. That means it can measure my pulse rate, so you can see a little 66 at the bottom there. But it also measures the pallor. So if I am jaundiced, if my liver is letting me down, it could again provide an alert. So I think we are looking at the interaction of sensors with the system. Well, that's fine, but some of the sensors require your blood. So if you're diabetic, you have to prick your finger every day. Not very pleasant. So just have a sensor that looks at the colour of light through your finger and tells on your smartphone what's going on. And that's now available in Europe. So I see the connected home being like this. You'll see the vital signs monitors, you'll see the alarms, you'll see the smart energy meters trying to tell me what I can do to reduce my energy bills. It's monitoring my activity, of course, because it would be nice to know if I was declining, because there might be a reason for it. It might control some of the movements around that house. It'll certainly give me access to the internet, probably via the TV screen there. And that will be an important part of informing me, giving me information, allowing me, of course, to play games and information. And wouldn't it be good if some of this advice was in the form of a game so that I really did want to take part in it? I could do my rehabilitation exercises because I'd had an illness. I could be coached to do things in different ways. I could be provided with news and specific clips on how to do things. So if I'm newly diagnosed as asthmatic and I have an inhaler and I don't know how to use it, pick up my YouTube video there on my TV. I can discuss with other people what it means. I can book not only my hospital appointments, but also my trains and my planes. And then, of course, my well-being will matter. It should tell me how I'm getting on, and it should remind me to do things, when to take medication, when to eat, when to drink, when not to do things. I need video links. So much the same as FaceTime would do on your mobiles now, you can do it over your TV. And then any alerts about the weather, about travel problems, email, that interaction that you need to be part of the community, and ultimately the teleconsultations. Because my father's 92 and he really wasn't very well 2 weeks ago, and he phoned his doctor and his doctor said, come down for an appointment at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. He isn't well, so the doctor should come to him. If he can't do that, then he can come to him on the TV screen, and that must be the way forward. And far more tests will be performed in your home. Just about anything can be performed now by a €100 meter. So let's use them more, and let's make more use of them. An example I really like, and is in the news, people who have chemotherapy struggle because sometimes their body doesn't react the way they expect to. They give up. Well, if you measure the response to chemo, you can provide all the right responses. For people who have a cognitive impairment, they might be cooking in the kitchen and they're distracted by the telephone or by someone at the front door. And then they've forgotten what they're doing. So that's how fires are formed. But sometimes it's the case that they forget that they've left something on, and they simply don't know where to restart. In Newcastle, we've designed a whole kitchen complete with utensils with embedded sensors. And the sensors interpret what people are doing. So the knife, it knows whether you're using it for dicing, slicing, peeling, or even stabbing. And it reminds you what you're doing last if you're interrupted. Fibre optic surfaces tell you what is on a surface. Tags, whether they're RFIDs, know what you're using and can provide you with this information actually on a display screen much like this on the kitchen wall. So ideal for people with Alzheimer's who need that prompting. But that information flow is fine if you're in the home, but actually if you're stuck in a house, what's your quality of life going to be like? The answer is not very good. So we must encourage mobile use, and most of these functions can be performed on a mobile, and we know that in Africa, for example, and in many developing nations, they're already being performed. So simple mobile phones, the type that you all threw away 10 years ago, they're still useful in other countries. They can replace what's in the home, and I predict they will. So you can combine the modem with the existing hardware into something that looks more elegant, but actually is more likely to be totally mobile-based in the future. And one of perhaps the examples, again, dealing with the Alzheimer's situation, is what happens for someone who gets lost. They go out wandering in the middle of the night, they're at risk, they might fall, they might fall into a river, they might try and cross a busy road. If they carry a phone, simple to communicate with them, we can use GPS with zoning. If they wear a watch, again, lots of devices available with geofencing which can alert them. And if they don't wear either, there are lots of other devices that are now small enough and are specific. And of course, what can you do to make sure they carry it? Well, you can put it on their clothing, and that's what we now have as well. And there's a company in Tipperary who will sell you trainers that have GPS functionality. The problem is that most of the 80-year-old ladies who have Alzheimer's don't wear that type of trainer. But there we are. Perhaps we'll find a solution to that. But the future lies in what's in all of your pockets. It's a smartphone, and that's a phone embedded with rich sensors which give you information. And because they've got all those sensors, the world of apps opens up. And I could spend half an hour talking to you about apps, but apps are dealt with elsewhere in this fantastic campus event. But simple ones that I really like are hearing tests. And you know, there isn't a single man over 50 who doesn't need a hearing test because he can't hear his wife nag him. That's nature. The problem is he won't go for a test, but he can have that test performed at home using an app. And once you've actually got the app and you know exactly what the deficit is, you can use your smartphone as one of the best digital amplifiers in the world, even with that goldfish function. Do you know what I mean by a goldfish function? Do you know what is the memory of a goldfish? It's, well, people tell me anything from 5 seconds to 5 minutes. The answer is 1 lap of the bowl. So say 10 seconds. And what people can't hear when their hearing is going is the last thing that was said to them. And they ask you to repeat it. Well, there's a touch button on a smart screen, and that's all you do, and it repeats the last 10 seconds of text. So that can do that and a lot of other things. The sensors, though, don't have to be plugged in because wirelessly they can communicate. And I think, firstly, we might use people's own jewellery. People who have body piercings could be active sensors, but perhaps more acceptable in the short term would be flexible sensors that are tattooed on. And look at the scale here. We've just got a miniature sensor, and it's got built-in electronics that can look certainly at temperature, sweating levels. It's powered internally, and it will work for a couple of weeks. So great for people to use in the short term. Other sensors, they can look at how you feel. They can look at metabolic diseases, and that includes things like diabetes. And they can be fabricated cheaply. So the whole world of sensing will change. We have sensors that can be embedded as well, simply under the skin. That's a particular Swiss device. There are others that look at the blood flow continually. So there's a lot of things in your blood that can tell you what's going on. That's another Swiss device which is implanted in that way. So many of them will be implanted. Some will be worn on the surface. Others could be worn in clothing. And that particular system is designed to provide an early warning of a small tumour in the breast. Moving to the world of sport, it's already happening. The kit itself, the shirt, embeds the sensors within the shirt and provides movement activity, players' heart rate information, how far they move, how quickly they move. And that's part of modern sporting. And actually, they're relatively low cost. And some of these, and look at the pricing there, €78 for a German system for an individual to wear within their boot. You have the whole team for €3,000, along with all the analytics, which will tell you how players compare in performance. So coaches of the future will use this analytics. And they all link Bluetooth, smartphone, tablet. And from the tablet, it's in the world of big data. So it all links back again. Same thing in the world of rugby, only this time, perhaps the sensors aren't so sophisticated, but what is the analytics. It's how people are straining, how people are reaching peak performance. And this really is using the best of IBM analytics, you know, the best computers in the world. And this is now coming up with statistics, which is allowing a sports team not only to look at how players are performing on the field today, but how they can be developed in the future. Sometimes this could be seen as a bit scary, but sport is now professional, so this is what you might expect. And I can hardly leave the topic of worn analytics and sensors without mentioning Google Glass, how it might work for a paramedic arriving at a motor vehicle accident scene and being able to stream the information back to the E&A department, to the expert doctors who can tell that paramedic what to do. Or similarly, a nurse visiting someone concerned about a wound that's open, that it has been treated but may not be recovering as fast as they can, providing them with expert help. It'll avoid errors. You can always scan what you're doing, compare it to the record, insert it into the record. You're passing a bed, you can see everything you want about that person and how it's changing over time. So a device that might look very geeky has phenomenal opportunity, even if it integrated perhaps into a nurse's hat or into the doctor's stethoscope. And that leads us to robots, and well, that's another subject, of course, but that's the one in Japan that will take patients to their bed when they arrive, their personal friend. That's a Swiss design which cleans floors. That's a Japanese design that actually cleans the toilets, a job nobody else wants to do. And that's a system that effectively detects when someone's nappy needs to be changed. So this is very much an elderly care, and it's doing the jobs that we humans actually don't want to do. So where are we with robotics? And I know you'll see them in other zones this week, but actually that's about where we are. That's a robot that can do domestic tasks. It can fold towels. And if I ran the video, it would take 20 minutes. So it's still some way away from being useful. This is a system that can wash a patient. Actually, it can only wash their arm. And that takes 20 minutes too. But we're getting there. And I have to leave this subject telling you that there's only one that's commercially viable and readily available, and it's $8,000, and it's American rather than European. So finally, quantified self. Well, I think there's unity on what it should be, whether you're working for Nike or whether you're an Apple visionary. They agree that this digital healthcare arena is where the traditional computing world meets biology. And biology really is about the blood, about the genomics. And these blood tests and markers can tell you an awful lot. So you can take a blood sample, and out of it, it can tell you the levels of particular indicators and how they should be changed to improve your performance, whether it's to stay healthy or whether you're a sportsman. And the kits, $50. Okay, you have to repeat it perhaps every 2 or 3 months. But this is now do-it-yourself healthcare, do-it-yourself health improvement, because it comes up with advice. And there's a whole host of things that it can help with. And one of these, Inside Tracker, really allows you to track your own performance. Are you improving your performance because you're taking advice on diet and on lifestyle? Will we get to personal genome decoding? Well, people have been talking, can we reach sub 1,000? Can we reach sub 100? And certainly if Moore's law follows, then we will very soon, and we're already down at the sub 1,000 mark. And that's available, and you can go to 23andMe and get your genome decoded. But actually, more likely, you'll have a microgenome, and that matters because it swabs different parts of you, which can tell you, again, what to do to improve your lifestyle and hence improve your performance and probably avoid some of the diseases that might hit. Link that with worn activity monitors, and there's lots and lots of them around. Some of them are low cost, some of them are just accelerometers that you wear. Tennis players use them for years. I even have one that I normally wear myself. So this is a £90 unit, which tells me how I compare with other people. It also tells me how well I sleep and what I need to do perhaps, or what to avoid to have a good night's sleep. So to quantify it, we may take things like this. We also use our mobile phones to the full. Apps that ask you how you wear. And this is one from the London School of Economics called Mappiness. And what it does is essentially ask you how you like to present data, and allows you to see how your happiness changes over time. And then on a population basis, you can look across Europe. That's just the UK look. You can look at the London view to see who's happy today. So what events change people's happiness and how it changes over time. And they have a hedometer which can tell you how happy people actually are. And not surprisingly, perhaps people have peaks and troughs, and they're very happy when they go home, and they're not so happy when they go to work, and they're happier on Saturdays and Sundays and during the week. And you take it to the extreme, and someone called Stephen Wolfram really has done this to the extreme. He's been tracking his own performance over years and years. He's got his own analytical engine to do this, and it measures things like the meetings that he attends, when he attends them during the day, how far he walks. And as you can see, he walks lunchtime, but actually during the rest of the day, he doesn't walk much. Shows you when he gets telephone calls, when he goes to meetings. These days, when he responds to and collects emails. And if you look at his performance over time, what it shows you is that he's getting more and more digitally active. Well, are we all working harder? If we are, we're increasing our stress, and we need to do something about it. So as we move into this digital world, we really need to work smarter rather than harder or longer. I really believe that's going to happen. My presentation is available to you if you need to see it. It'll probably have to be excised in some way because it's over 50 megabytes, but you're welcome to have copies if you email me. And I'm now happy to take questions until we finish. There's a lady up there with a microphone. If anyone would like to ask a question, please, if you could give your name and perhaps where you're from, then I'll do my best to answer it.
Hello, great presentation. I was just wondering, with all of these devices surrounding us all the time, how is it in the long term going to affect our health in a way? All of these wireless signals going through us, around us. I mean, it's a general topic question, but
Yeah.
that's it.
Okay, thank you for that. I deliberately finished with that idea of how far we go on this, quantifying ourselves. And the reason is that, yes, we're going to have this data smog. And to be honest, as a technologist, I'd be more concerned about the opportunities for crosstalk and interference rather than the health information, which remains, I suppose, unclear. Certainly, I wouldn't want my children to be having a mobile device stuck on their heads 24/7 for the next 60 years. So I think there's some common sense there. But I genuinely believe that there's a real opportunity here for data overload, which will cause stress. I don't believe it will be a physical effect. I think it will be a mental effect. And I think we need to manage it. And that's where I think the powerful tools, the big data analytics, will come to our rescue. It's a bit like the GP. When he sees you, or he or she sees you, they have 8 to 10 minutes to work out what's wrong and what to do. They could pull in all this data. You could present them with the last 12 months of analytics from a device like this. They have no time for that. What they want is all of that to be fed into some big funnel and something clever that tells them the questions to ask and what to look for. So I think we will have to be efficient, and I think the right analytics will enable us to do that so that we only get the key things. Yes, we can dig deeper if we need to, But if we don't, we'll be completely overwhelmed by the digital world, and I think that will have a negative effect on our health and lifestyle ultimately.
Yeah.
Any more?
Yeah, I also have a question.
And you are
Luka,
from?
Slovenia.
Welcome.
Thank you. When you were talking about those GPS locators, right? My grandfather has a bit of Alzheimer's and he tends to wander off. And my grandmother is kind of panicking when she's looking for him. Is there a product that's like synchronized with Google Maps that he could carry around with him and we could locate it?
Yes is the answer. There are lots of them. If your grandparents lived in the UK, then services would be made available. But actually, what I have done for a friend of a friend, I went on Amazon and I bought a €30 GPS locator. And it comes direct with software which sends an SMS alert to any phone that you program it to. And the SMS alert carries the Google Map location. Bang, straight in, €30. Now, how well it works depends on the coverage, of course. It's a mobile device, so there are not spots. So depending where he goes, but these are very, very mature in the UK. The services with all the constraints. Remember, there are issues here of governance and to do with personal data integrity. Do you want to wear this device? In the US, they tend to wear the watches. As happens in the US, someone is suing the manufacturer because the person wearing it tried to remove it with a saw, and they cut their wrist. So there are lots of issues that need to be addressed, but with everyone's consent, this is now a very low-cost solution. The geofences, people understand exactly the range that can be used. Some devices have geofences that you can select that they're only active during the night, for example. Others have different shapes of geofence, and others allow you to have several geofences. So one might be for your home, one might be for a relative's home. So for people who have Alzheimer's, it's going to get worse. But the good thing is that the people who wander, it tends to last 3 to 4 months only. And then they stop wandering. Actually, the disease progresses to a stage where they can no longer go out unaccompanied because they lose many of the other functions. But if they're in very early stage, can I recommend a GPS backtracker, which is like a compass, which you press the button and it points you in the direction of home and tells you how far. And that's something, again, about €50 you can carry with you, and it'll work everywhere where there's a GPS signal. Any more questions? We're down to the last 5 minutes, so...
Hi, I'm Connor from Social Media DOUGHTY in Dublin. That was a brilliant presentation.
Thank you.
If an average consumer, if they want to find out about these devices, they have to come to this event, or else where would they find out about them? Would they ever find out about them in the local pharmacy?
No, they wouldn't. You're absolutely right. And I'm actually working with an Irish company called Independent Living Ireland to try and bring these to the focus of the public. Awareness is the biggest obstacle facing the world of digital healthcare. People don't understand that this isn't Big Brother. They don't understand that we are actually empowered by all of this. We can buy it ourselves. There are lots of articles, and that's probably the best way to find things. But once you know what's needed, there need to be people who can advise. In the UK, that is a local authority and a public health function, so this should be set up. I think in Ireland that will happen. I hope that there's a project, a European Union project called Telescope, and that will, I think, lead to a bigger understanding of what's needed to bring services to a higher quality and bring the information needed to a public stage. The project has 9 partner organisations from different countries, including Latvia, Ireland for sure, and several other Eastern European countries. So I think this will happen end of September. So I think big things will happen, but people like you to become the evangelists for digital healthcare. You're the ones who see it, who understand it, and who have the means because you are connected to help others. I think you need to find those relatives and friends and older people who just won't have the access to this information. I think we've probably got time for one more.
Hi there, I'm Ben from London. One of the things, I have one of these Fitbit trackers and started looking at the data, and it's all quite interesting, quite exciting. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to the algorithms that you can use and patterns that you find. Is there anyone that is doing some interesting algorithms or open research papers that you can find more about this kind of thing?
There are lots of people, and perhaps offline we can discuss who is doing this. The problem is always, is the API open? This is access to the data set. So companies will want to keep hold of the data. But it's your data, and you have a right to it. The real clever algorithms will combine all these sources together. This really will be big data stuff. The analytics, I think they'll mature. People are working it. I guess it's very much at a research level. I think it's the presentation, the way you display information that's going to be key. Because once more, we can't spend all our time looking through all this trend. We need to have something in a very succinct format. And that's where I think the big research possibility is going to be. So I think they're exciting times, and I think you will find this consolidation of data sets happening very, very soon. So people will know exactly how to compare with others and how you compare with people in other countries, people with similar genomic backgrounds, with similar professions perhaps. Okay, well, I think that's the end of our time, and I need to vacate the stage before the next presentation starts. Please email me if you have a question or want information, but otherwise, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, next on Leonardo's stage we have Delphine Eberly, and she'll be talking about the maintenance of